First of all, hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out. My name is Rabbi Mendel Kessin. And what I decided to do tonight and for next week also is to give you an abbreviated version of a much longer version. Really, I have a website called TorahThinking.com. Also, it's viewed on YouTube. But the main idea is that right now there are 15 videos of this particular lecture, and this week and next week. 15 videos. That's approximately 25 hours. It's a lot of stuff. And what I did is that I decided to once and for all say what I felt. I've been learning Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, Ramchal, the great Ramchal, for over 50 years. And he obviously is an incredible approach to what hashkafa and so on, Jewish thinking and so on and so forth. So I decided, actually it's really very interesting how this whole thing came about. Long ago, a year and a half ago, I knew that Trump would win, whatever. So I would just give drips and drabs about, as time went on, I would just speak drips and drabs. And finally, my son made a bar mitzvah in the last summer, at the end of August. So usually I'm in Eretz Yisrael for the summer. So I decided to stay. But since I decided to stay, I give a shiur in Lakewood, New Jersey, which is where I live, by the way, when I'm not here. I decided, I give a shiur every Saturday night, Matzah Shabbos. So I decided, I said, wait a minute, I'm going to be here the whole summer anyway. I might as well give a full understanding of what is happening instead of drips and drabs. Let me give it out and finally tell people what I think is going to happen. And this was last summer, in June actually. What is happening, what is going to happen, but most importantly, why. And that's what I did. So far, there's 15 videos, which is 25 hours of this stuff. So this is really a summary of that shiur. And so if you'd like to listen to the original version, which I would encourage everybody to do, if you can steal the 25 hours off your life, because there's an enormous amount of details that I leave out, obviously. But I think it's worth your while. And also I think it's very important. Why? Not because I give the lecture. It's really irrelevant. The real reason for that is because we live in a time which we have tremendous problems. We don't understand what's going on. There's what's called a chalisha of emunah. There's a tremendous amount of diminishment of belief in God. We believe in God, but it's not the same. We don't have the same passion because we're very confused. We see, a tremendous amount of contradictory ideas going on in the world, especially the last 15 years. It's just incredible. We see evil proliferate, evil succeed. We see good is always suffering at some level and so on. Also, a lot of people have a lot of problems with their lives and so on and so forth. There's something wrong here. It's chaos. And what that does is it affects us. It affects our emunah. It affects our faith in God, our belief in God, and it affects our trust in God. That's not good. One of the greatest ways, which I realized, one of the greatest ways to see the hand of God, that God has not abandoned the Jews at all. It's true, he's hiding what he does. That's true. But if you realize what he's doing, then it'll be a tremendous, what's called chizuk, reinforcement of your belief in God. That's the greatest way to do that. So I felt, therefore, that it's sort of like an obligation, actually, that if I have this type of information, I should really give it out. And that's really why I did it. And I took the summer. And then what's funny about that is I only thought I would give only a couple of ideas. 1, 2 lectures, and that's it. In fact, after the second lecture in June, I just say, well, next week will be the last lecture. Yeah, sure, right? It wound up to be, another 20 hours of this stuff. In a certain sense, I was driven, I have to say. I was driven really for that concept. The Jews have to understand that God has not abandoned us. There are reasons of why things are happening, and what God has given me a tremendous merit to understand that, for whatever reason. And therefore, I decided to unfold and disclose that type of information for that purpose. I'm not interested in any type of cover or any of that. It's irrelevant, really. Just the machazik emunah. That's really what it's all about, So I hope that this does it. You know what I'm saying? Now, you don't have to agree with me at all. I don't really care if you agree with me or not. It doesn't make a difference. And I think there's a lot of people on the internet that don't agree with me, you know. But who cares, you know? But what I do want to show you that there is an alternative way of thinking. There's a whole different way of understanding of what is going on, you see. And that's important. Whether you agree with me or not doesn't make a difference. But you know, after this lecture, next week's lecture, that there is an entire explanation based on authentic Jewish sources, and that explains what is going on and why. And that's the purpose of this lecture. So we are about to take a journey. Now, the ideas you hear here are some of them are going to be really way out, as they say, you know, and so on, what you're going to say, that doesn't make sense. But actually, they all make sense, but, you know, it's just strange. But that's fine, because I find that many Jews, unfortunately, are not familiar with what's called the divine plan. With the divine plan. They're not familiar with this at all, which is unfortunate. And certainly to be able to look at the divine plan and connect it to current events is forget about. So therefore, in many ways, I am privileged to be able to do that for that specific purpose, that you should walk away saying, you know, maybe God has not forgotten us, maybe. He still remembers us, and he really wants to call an end to this entire exile, and maybe this is the way he's doing it. That's really the conclusion would be I'd love you to reach, and so on. So with that aside, I would now like to begin this idea. Some of the ideas will be familiar to people because I've said them over and over again. But the main idea is that it's being filmed, obviously, and there are many people that may look at this and they will not, without an introduction, they won't know where I'm coming from. So I'm forced to repeat ideas, but the key is you have to be patient. And I want to quote what the Ramchal says. Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto says in the beginning of Das Funas. This is it. I'm quoting him. Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto in a sefer called Das Funas. To acquire wisdom, true understanding, one needs to build up concepts one after another until, in the end, they all form part of a unified whole, panorama, landscape, and therefore you will attain the knowledge of the final ultimate concept. So that's what I have to do. I'm going to go slowly, you know, and I have to build it up, and then you can see the entire scenario of the Messianic process, to what extent I can explain it, and what is happening and why. Okay. By the way, I want to tell you a disclaimer. I'm not a prophet. Although a lot of stuff I'm going to say is saying, excuse me, you know, how do you know this stuff? But I'm telling you now, I'm not a prophet. That's out. Although I love to see prophets. But in any case, it's taking you too long to laugh. I'm sorry. It's you got to be quicker than that. But the knowledge and information comes from the fact that I've immersed in this hashkafa for 50 years. And, you know, obviously my view is different than most people. And therefore I'm able to see things that obviously a lot of people can't. And fortunately, I'm able to put it together, you know, in a cohesive manner. So that's a disclaimer. Any case, okay, history. There are two types of history. One history is called descriptive history. It's what we learned when we were in high school. You know, names, dates, places, this kind of stuff. That's simple. But history really, the scholastic history, is interpretive. It doesn't merely look at what happened when and how and so on, but it looks into why. Why, what causes human events? What causes history, the events of history? And that's called interpretive or scholastic history. Obviously, that's what historians try to do. It's much more than just naming events. We need to understand why, for whatever reason, to understand history, to perhaps prevent a repetition of calamities and catastrophes. Look, there's a lot of great stuff that can come out of obviously learning history. But there are two types of history. Now, the mistake that historians make, which is fine, is that they think that they understand the ultimate causes of history. What are the ultimate causes of history that they think is the reasons? Is the following. There's economic reasons why events occur, military reasons, cultural reasons, scientific reasons, and so on, political reasons, right? And according to them, this is why historical events occur. And this is what they obviously labor to figure out. But when you ask the Torah, why does history occur? It has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with the divine plan. Everything. Except what God does is he conceals his actions. And what he does is he allows political events or military events or scientific or cultural events and so on to be what's called the intermediate causes. And that allows him to be concealed. You see? So we as Jewish scholars, right? That's where we're all now, right? We're now going to become scholars now. We're going to bypass these intermediate reasons, right? Which is what historians do. And we are going to go into the true nature of the divine plan. And we'll have to build up the concepts, but once you understand them, you will be incredibly rewarded because you will no longer read Yediot Achronot or whatever these papers are, right? The New York Times, as far as their history is concerned, you will understand it at a whole different level. So that's what I want to do. I want to try to understand history from the standpoint of a divine plan. Okay. Now, what is a divine plan? Okay, I would like to summarize it. I hope God forgives me, but I want to summarize it in 6 points. What exactly is the divine plan? What does he want? Why are we here? Okay, obviously it's an enormous amount of speaking. Each of these points is easily a whole lecture in itself. But I'm going to, just briefly mention each point, which is very important, and I'll try to briefly describe them. 1, why did God create this universe altogether? He doesn't need us, we know that. He's completely independent of anything outside of him. God has no limit, he's independent, right? And there's nothing that we could do for him, nothing. So no, why do it? And the answer that the Chazal give is Hatova. God created the universe to bestow an infinite state of goodness on a human being, period. It's a simple answer. Now we can ask ourselves, why would he want to do that? In other words, what's the motive of the motive? And the answer is unknown. We don't know why God does that. We just know the immediate motive, which is called hatova, to bestow a state of incredible well-being or goodness or whatever you want to call it, benefit and so on a human being. But we don't know why. That's fine. Torah doesn't give us a reason why, but it does tell us lehetiv bi'achrisecha, to do good in your end. That we do know. Fine. So if that's the case, the next question is, well, what is hatova? What is the greatest form of goodness? Because we know God doesn't renege if he wants to do something. He's not cheap. If I want to give you guys the best thing you could ever receive, which means that the greatest thing that existence allows, what is that? And the answer is a divine experience. What God wants is that we should be attached to him. It's called a divine hug, if you want to look at it that way. That's it. There is nothing greater than that. It's called vekus, attachment. Now, we have no idea what that is, or we can suspect what it means, but we don't really know what it is. But we do know that the reward, or rather the benefit that he wants to give us ultimately is called hatova shlema, the greatest or perfect good, which is dvekus, to be attached to him totally, in a way which we cannot even comprehend. And I'm talking here about God, which obviously is a being that we have no comprehension about. In any case, that's what he wants. But God has to make an incredible decision. What do I do? Should I give it to them for free, matana, or do they have to work for it? This is a very weighed decision. You can imagine the repercussions of this. So God decides, without going into why, like I said, each one of these ideas is a whole shiur in itself. God decides that it has to be avodah. You have to work for this. He's not going to give it to you for free. Sounds strange, but that was the decision. It has enormous, obviously, consequences. Therefore, what it means is that if we have to work for it, right, then obviously, which means that it's not a matana, it's schar, it's reward. Because if you have to expend efforts, then you are rewarded for the effort, you see. So that's what God decides. However, if that's the case, if we have to work for it, then God has to create a task. So what God has to do is create a task for man, obviously, because he wants you to work. So it's interesting what he does. Let me tell you what he does. Really, very fascinating. What he does is that he sends forth incredible divine energies. Now, in Kabbalah, they're called spheres. We don't know what they really are, but they're clearly spiritual. But they're divine forces or divine energies, which he sends forth. Okay, and these energies or forces can create realities, and they create different realities. In Kabbalah, there are 5 of them. And finally, what happens is that these spheres sort of like diminish. It's like taking a 1,000-watt bulb and diminishing its wattage. 800, 700, 600, and so on. As a result of that, the realities that they create is different. It's diminished or degraded. It's inferior. Finally, they create a physical universe. Same spheres, same divine energies, and they create a physical universe. Okay. Why? Because what God wants is that we, who are really the soul of man, he will insert the neshama into a physical body. That's what he does. And the problem then is automatically that the physical body and the physical world now becomes a barrier to feeling spirituality. That's what he does. So it's interesting. God conceals the spiritual universes and himself through the physical medium called the body and the entire physical universe. That's how he does it. So we are now spiritual entities. It's almost like an angel where he puts an angel into a physical body. So what he does is he puts us, which is a soul, into a physical body, and we now have a physical barrier where we cannot experience real spirituality. And what God wants is the following. He wants us to remove the barrier. That's our job, you see. When we remove the barrier, what does that mean, removing a barrier? What it means is the concept called zikuch. Zikuch means to purify, to remove the contaminant from the world that we're in. What is the contaminant? The contaminant is the physical body itself. What we have to do is dematerialize the physical body. That's right. That means if we do that, all of a sudden the physical body becomes transparent, and the neshama, the soul, immediately becomes obvious. You see. So that's called zikuch, very important concept, where we transform the physical world back into its previous stage that's called zikuch, into a spiritual universe. That's right. So therefore, if you ask yourself, where is the future world? And the answer is, it's here. I know a lot of people say, excuse me, it's here? You call this world the what? The future world? Of course not. But what we have to do is retransform this world into the future world, into a series of steps, which is very interesting. And therefore, that is ultimately up to us. We need to create or retransform a physical universe into a spiritual universe, and ultimately becomes Olam Haba, which is the future world, and that's the world we will exist in for eternity. Yes, that's what it is. It's interesting. So that's the task of man. Okay, it's a concept called Tikon, which means to rectify, but to rectify means to do what? To restore the way it used to be, the neshama that used to be in the world of spirit. We need to restore that. So it's literally like removing a barrier, except the barrier is physical substance, and we got to remove that. And that's the concept called zikuch. Got that? So that's the purpose of man, to remove the physical barrier in order to make this universe spiritual. Okay. Now, how do we do it? Wait a minute. I have to have an instrument to do this. How do I begin to do this? And the answer is the following, and I have to be very brief about this. One, the first way to do this, and this is a secret without going into why, is mitzvahs. God decided that he's going to give us a commandment, and when you observe that commandment, you will therefore dematerialize the universe. It doesn't happen right away. Forget about why, but it's like a bank account where you store up a certain amount of cash that you can spend later on. What happens when you do a mitzvah, you store up a credit. Many mitzvahs, many credits, and eventually those credits will be ascribed to you, and you could dematerialize the universe when the appropriate time arrives, which we'll talk about later. Okay? Therefore, mitzvahs is the first way to do it. But God knew that many Jews are not going to do mitzvahs. Big problem here, you see. They're just not going to do mitzvahs. So if that's the only Tikon device, it's not going to work. So what God did is he initiated a second Tikon device, you see. And I call them the Tikon device because they ultimately dematerialize the universe. The second device is called tshuva, repentance. That if you sin, right, And sinning actually increases physicality, and so on, without getting into that. You can actually undo the sin by doing tshuva, repentance. So tshuva, which is a mitzvah, but it's different than all mitzvahs, because it can actually undo any sin that you did. That's what tshuva does, repentance does. So therefore, the second tikkun device is called tshuva or repentance. But God knew that people are not going to do tshuva, right? We daven in Yom Kippur, right? And Ma'ariv, it takes less than, Ma'ariv after Yom Kippur qualifies to the Guinness World Record of the fastest Ma'ariv you ever davened. So the question then is, wait a minute, whatever happened to the tshuva, right? Okay, so obviously we don't do tshuva, we do half tshuva or whatever. So God said, I need to give a third tikkun device, okay, to make sure that if they don't do mitzvahs, they don't do tshuva, they can do the third tikkun device. What is that? That device is called yisurin, or suffering. That's right. Suffering isn't so much a retribution for some sin you did. No. What suffering really is the third tikkun device, without getting into how it works. It actually enables you, when you have suffering, it enables you again to do zikuch. Now, there are many forms of suffering, right? Parnasa, bankruptcy, divorce, sickness, all kinds of medical problems and so on. Not only that, that's on an individual level. On a national level, what do you have? You have golus, exile, you have persecutions, you have all kinds of difficulties, anti-Semitism. All of that is taken into account as the concept called Yisurin, and the Jews, which I will talk about, because obviously they're the main actors. What happens is that a person who does mitzvahs, tshuva, and Yisurin, ultimately he will do the tikkun. That's it. Those are the three tikkun devices. And there's obviously a great deal I'm missing out, but that's fine. Okay, we have now an understanding of the basic elements of the divine plan. Purpose, the reward, that has to be work. We know the task is a physical barrier. We know it's zikuch, that you have to undo the physical barrier, and it's done through the instrumentation or instrumentality called mitzvahs, tshuva, and yisurin. Mosai. That's what it spells out. Okay? There you are. That, in a nutshell, is the divine plan. Now, how does it apply to us? God creates a man, Adam Rishon, the first man. Is this man Jewish? The answer, of course not. Adam is not Jewish. Adam is simply a human being. Could Adam do tikkun? And the answer is yes. But wait a minute. I thought the Jews do the tikkun, right? No. This is a tremendous mistake people make. In the original plan of creation, the one to do the tikkun, which means to rectify creation, which means to dematerialize the universe, originally God wanted mankind to do the job, not Jews, mankind. Think about that. It's only fair. So Adam is not Jewish, but he is a human being. And he has the power of tikkun. Why? Because he has a soul that has 5 parts, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaim, yechidah, and each part is connected to the 5 worlds. So every time Adam does something, immediately has an effect, a profound effect on all the olamas, all the worlds. You see? So Adam is not a Jew, but you know what he is? He's an Israeli. You have to laugh at that. Excuse me, what? It says in Medrash that God made a condition with the world. He said, listen, if the Jews accept, if the Yisrael accepts the Torah, good. If not, then I restore the world to chaos. He didn't say Jew, he says Yisrael. Who is Yisrael? A Yisrael is a spiritual ability to do the tikkun. That's really what it is, you see. So the concept of Adam Rishon is that he's a Yisrael. He's an Israelite, Israeli, whatever. He could do the tikkun. He don't have to be Jewish. There are no Jews living at that time. Who was the first Jew? Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu was 52 years old when the world turned 2,000. That's 2,000 years later. You see? So anybody can ask, why would God wait 2,000 years for the Jews to show up? And the answer is, he didn't. He wanted mankind to do the tikkun, you see. And Adam could do the tikkun. But the problem was this, that Adam failed. So as a result of his failure, tremendous consequences arose as a result of his failure. First of all, he became physical. Adam Rishon before the sin wasn't as physical as we are. He became much more physical as a result without getting into that, as a result of his sin. Okay, he became like one of us. Real physical people with urges, needs, drives. That's what he became after the sin. That's the first thing. The second thing, which is very interesting, is what was the job of man really? Now, God created a snake, a nachash, that would tempt Adam to sin. We know that, the primordial snake. And obviously, the snake was a very bright creature. It could talk and so on. And that snake represented the Satan. It was the mouthpiece of the Satan. And the Satan is an angel that really is assigned a task to do what? To tempt us to sin. And if we sin, he also prosecutes us. And if his prosecution is valid, then he also is the executioner. He has 3 jobs, by the way, the Satan. Okay. But in those days, the Satan's job was to tempt man to sin. The problem was that man bought into that temptation. The Satan, without going through the whole thing, ultimately, eat from the tree of good and evil. Anyway, Adam did that. He bought into the thought, the idea of the Satan. He and his wife Chava, and therefore they created a terrible catastrophe in among the world. First of all, Adam became much more physical. But anyway, here's the real problem that happened. And you need to know this, because part of what's happening today is what happened in the 5,777 years ago. You'll see what I mean. What happened? God came over to Adam, so to speak, and he said, bad news. You violated my command. Therefore, until now, your job was to ignore the advice of the Satan, you see, because evil, in many ways, was external to the body of man. It was not internal. So God said, until now, your job was to avoid or ignore the advice of the Satan. Now your job is to kill him. You must destroy evil, because you bought into it, you believed it, you gave it credibility, it now dominates you. You need to kill it. That's the Tikon, the satanic idea itself. Okay. What do you mean kill it? Yeah, kill it. Eradicate it, obliterate it, annihilate it, right? Demolish it. Whatever synonym you want to use. You need to kill the malach. And that will be the Tikon. You see. But how do you do that? I can't kill a Satan. And the answer is an incredible thing that what God did. And this is very important to understand human history. It's a fundamental principle. What God did is the following. Everything that exists is connected to God. What God does, he sends forth a divine force, which I mentioned, and that creates, and that also maintains the existence. Everybody has that connection, like a cable. You see, if somebody were to walk over, it's invisible, by the way. If somebody, thank God for that. A lot of cables will be cut. But so the divine flow goes through that cable. If somebody to walk over to somebody and cut the cable, if you could do that, that individual or anything, this stender, anything, will instantly cease to exist. Instantly. Because it has no divine flow of holiness or shef or hashpah or whatever you want to call it. Okay. Now everybody's connected. Adam was connected to God. The snake was connected to God. Right? Chava, everybody, including the Satan, a malach. So what God did is astounding. He goes over to the malach called the Satan. He takes the cable of the Satan, because the Satan, the malach, has that cable. He cuts it. Right? That means the flow is about to stop. So before the Satan expires, he connects it to the cable of man, Adam. Wow. So here's what happened. It's like a Y. There's a cable that comes down from heaven. However, it's invisible. And it splits. One side goes into Adam Harishon, and the other side goes into the Satan. Now, okay, so we share the divine force. But here's the problem. There's basically only enough force to come down for either side, for one side to exist. There's not enough for two. This is bad news, you see. So what happens now is a contest. It's combat. Who's going to get the force? You see, what determines the flow? It's up to Adam Harishon. If Adam does the will of God, then the force, this flow of incredible divine energy, kedusha, holiness, or whatever you want to call it, comes to Adam Harishon, and he becomes enormously energized. He becomes more spiritual. He has incredible mazel, you see. Now, since the force is coming to him, it's not going to the Satan. and the Satan grows weak. He gets sick, and he has to go into what's called the angelic ICU because he's dying. You see, if Adam takes all the force away from the Satan dies. There you are. In that kind of arrangement, we, or Adam Harishon, could kill the Satan. Okay? It's a very important formula. In fact, now, what happens if Adam doesn't do the will of God? He sins. Then the force goes to the Satan, and he becomes stronger. Talk Tikon Rab. He becomes enormously energized. Yes, very powerful. And man grows weaker. He becomes much more physical, much more interested in physicality, no spirituality. But the Satan grows stronger. Now, obviously, if man sins enough, then the Satan takes all of the power, all the force, and then man dies. That's the deal. So therefore, it is up to Adam Harishon to kill this Satan. And now we can do it. All you have to do is listen to the will of God. You see? This is the setup, what God does, which is in many ways fascinating. So, what happens now, however, is that God waits for 2,000 years because all mankind can now do the job of Tikon. There are no Jews because Avraham Avinu was 2,000, when the world was 2,000, and he was 52 years old. So there are no Jews around, and he clearly was the first Hebrew. That's really what he was. So the truth is, everyone who lived for 2,000 years, the Ramchal says, could do the Tikon. It's incredible. Because the job of Tikon, which we know as Zikuch, was given over toward mankind, which makes sense. Now, however, after 2,000 years, basically, you see, God said, enough is enough. These guys are sinning. Forget about Zikuch. They're making it worse, which I won't go into. First, they destroyed the world, Noach. The world got so bad that God had to destroy the entire world with a flood, Noach. And now, after another, 1,000 years, it's the same thing. And not only that, these guys are crazy. They're building a Tower of Babel to war against me and to bring me down. So God said, enough is enough. So God looked around the creation, and he saw, hey, there's a man that does my will. Who's this guy? Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu is the only one doing my will. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to disconnect. I'm going to take away the ability of mankind to do the Tikun, and I'm going to give it to Abraham, Avram, the Hebrew. So therefore, the job of Tikun now became a Jewish enterprise. Correct. And it went away from the nation. Okay. But God always gives a chance before he does that. So what he did is very interesting. He allowed two figures to grow in stature. One was Nimrod, and the other is Avraham Avinu. And here's what he said to himself. God said, if the world goes after Nimrod, which means to rebel against me, right? So forget about Tikon, right? Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the ability of this nation. And by the way, there was only one nation, as it says by the Doha Floga. And the world was one nation, Sofe Echos, one language, one nation. And that's all there was. There was one nation, Nimrod, and there was Avraham Avinu. So he said, if the world follows Nimrod, then I'm going to stop their ability to do the Tikon. And that's it. Which means I cut off part of their neshama. Without getting into that. Okay? If the world follows Nimrod, and I'm going to give the Tikun ability to Avraham Avinu. Now becomes a Jewish enterprise. If the world follows Avram, then what I'm going to do is I will not stop it, and I'll allow it to continue with the job of Tikun is now a universal mankind job. Well, guess what? What did the world do? The world followed Nimrod to rebel against God. So God said, I'm going to split them. And what God did is he split the nations. He introduced the concept of multiplicity of languages. We know that, right? And he split all the nations because that's how each culture of a nation depends on its language ability. And he just, that was it. And yet, all of a sudden, you had 70 nations. Why did he do that? Other than the fact that they didn't deserve, that the nation of that time was going to war against God didn't deserve that. Because of a very important reason. The problem is this: if God takes away the ability of this nation to do the Tikun, and the only one who's going to do the Tikun are the Jews, Avraham Avinu, who's a Hebrew, right? In other words, the job, the spiritual job, which is the Yisrael, now becomes part of the Ivri. So a Jew is now two things. He's a Hebrew nationally, but he's a Yisrael spiritually, because he can do the Tikon. The problem is the Jews never survive, because this one nation will sense the difference, anti-Semitism, and they'll kill the Jews. So you know what I'm going to do? What I'm going to do is I'm going to split the nations into 70. So meanwhile, they're going to fight amongst themselves and let the Jews go through. You see? So that's the strategy. If there are many nations, they'll kill themselves, which has been going on for thousands of years, right? And even though there still will be anti-Semitism, which is interesting, but it's nowhere near what would have been if there's only two nations around, you see? So that, in many ways, was very important, because God knew that if the nations remain one, they will destroy the Jews. But if I split them, right, then what will happen is the Jews can survive for the next 4,000 years to do the Tikon. This is what God did. Okay, that's a very interesting concept. Why? Because something that happened 4,000 years ago created a political event today, or near today, you see. What is that? Because God knew that if I give the Tikon to the Jews and take it away from the Goy, and that's when the concept called Goy entered. There was no such thing as a Goy. Everybody was a Goy. There was no such thing as a Jew, so there was no such thing as a Goy, right? A non-Jewish nation, right? This created the concept of Jew, and therefore there became the concept called non-Jew, which is Goy. And that's what it means that God made a covenant with Abraham, the Bris Ben Absarim, which is Nechomish, because what he did is he said, I'm now going to make an agreement with you to do the Tikon. That's really what the Bris Ben Absarim, and I'm going to take it away from the nations of the world because they continuously sin and they anger me or whatever, and so on. And that's why it says, V'nivruchu b'cho kol mishpoischu adama. That's why. That's the origin. In other words, since you're the only one doing Tikon, you're the only one that can bring Olam Haba. So that means all the nations which don't do the Tikon will be blessed because of your actions. That's what he means. That's what God means, you see? And that's what God means. Anybody who blesses you will be blessed because they will enable you to do the Tikun. But anybody who curses you, which means impedes you, they will be cursed because they're stopping the Tikun, and it's not even me punishing them. They are removing themselves from a beautiful Olam Haba. That's what those expressions mean now that you understand what's going on. But God knew, okay, I got to split them. But in the end of time, which we are now in, the Messianic era, which we're getting close to, right? What God wants to do is undo the split. Why? Because he doesn't need it anymore. Because the Jews will have done their tikkun. And therefore, what he now wants to do is he doesn't need to split the nations. He can bring them together. So therefore, there falls in man an idea. What's that called? United Nations. The United Nations is the undoing of the Dor HaFlaga. That's really what it is. And God was right, wasn't he? That as soon as they got together, you know what 90% of the time what the UN is doing? Condemning Israel, right? But why? Because that's exactly why God split them in the first place. But now it doesn't make a difference because now we're at the end of time. The Tikun is almost finished, as we will see, and therefore it is fine. You see? So therefore the United Nations is really the reversal of the Dor HaFlaga. It's amazing. An event that occurred 4,000 years ago is the reason why you had the League of Nations, which was the first attempt, and now the United Nations. So you could have predicted 4,000 years ago, hey, wait a minute, if you bring them together, right, 90% of this time is condemning Jews, the double standard. That's amazing, because that's the nature of nations that cannot do the tikkun, you see. Anyway, so we now begin to see how the Torah, in many ways, predicts what will be if you understand the underlying principles. And therefore, there's a whole concept of anti-Semitism if the nations get together. But even without that, there's an enormous amount of anti-Semitism. Do you know why there's anti-Semitism? There are many reasons. But you know what the real reason for that is? I'll tell you. It's interesting. Chazal, the rabbis, allude to it when they say, why is the mountain of Sinai called Sinai? So the Chazal say because Sinah, it created enormous hatred in the world against the Jews especially, right? Now, wait a minute. You mean because God gave the Torah to the Jews, therefore automatically they're sinner? The answer is yes. Why? What the rabbis are telling us is an incredible, profound understanding of the real origin of anti-Semitism. And I will tell you what it is. Goyim don't hate Jews, they hate God. And since the Jews represent God, they hate the Jews. That's the key. Why? Why do they hate God? Because man is always in combat. Who's the boss? Am I the boss or is God the boss? We hate authority figures because don't tell me what to do. This is the battle man always has. Who's the boss? Am I the boss or is God the boss? This is the eternal conflict that man has. So therefore, when God gave the Torah, right, in Sinai, he created sinner because God automatically gave an enormous amount of regulations and rules of conduct. And what people say, hey, excuse me, don't tell me what to do in what I do with my time. I want to do what I want. It's called prikas oil, to overthrow the yoke of God. And the Jew is supposed to do the reverse. Shema Yisrael, right? Makabel oil malchus shamayim. The real concept of anti-Semitism is because it pits man against God and it reduces man to being inferior. And nobody's going to tolerate that, as you will see. That's the real concept of anti-Semitism, and that's really they hate God. And since we are clearly his representatives, they hate us. Now, there are other reasons. They're incredibly jealous of Jews. But the underlying reason is this concept of, and that's what Chazal say, that Sinai created sinner. Okay, that's fabulous. We now understand the divine plan. You see? We understand in the beginning it was Adam, and then it changed to Avram Avinu. And he's the one who does the Tikon. So the whole Tikon process is what? Is to do the job of dematerializing the creation itself. And that will create Olam Haba. Wow, that's not bad. Do a divine plan in 45 minutes. Incredible. Okay, I hope God forgives me. Anyway, okay. But I want to tell you something very important now. Very important. Because originally the job of Adam was to ignore the advice of the Satan and then to bring down the Kedusha, just to bring down holiness, which is what? Which is the energy of the spheres. That's what he had to do. And therefore, the energy of the spheres, by bringing it down when you do the mitzvahs, would dematerialize the creation. Because remember, those divine energies can create realities. The problem is they diminish, so to speak, as you get lower, you see. But what happens if you turn up the wattage? Then automatically the spheres will dematerialize the entire physical universe, turn the whole world into Olam Haba, basically. You see? So therefore, the job of Adam was to bring down the rest of the energy. But what happened? Instead, he fed the Satan. So now the Satan is called Yiboneh. The Satan nourishes from the power of the Jew, because the Jew took over the job of Adam Harishon, you see. Until then, it was Adam Harishon. But after 2,000 years, the Jews took over the job of Tikon, which means that we are now connected to the Satan. That's right. If you thought you were close to your wife, forget it. You are much closer to the Satan, because the Satan and you are connected to the same cable. Every time you do a mitzvah, you deprive him of energy, and he diminishes. When you sin, you give him your energy that you would have gotten had you done the mitzvah, and he grows. In fact, the Satan is the only malach that can grow. He can either diminish or grow in stature. No other malach can do that. They are created as they are, and they're fixed. But the Satan can grow or diminish. Depending on the Jews, we strengthen evil. This is the bottom line. We can destroy it, and therefore we can also empower it. This is our problem. Therefore, there's two jobs now. We got to take back all the energy we gave the Satan, don't we? After thousands of years, Jews have sinned. So we got to take back all that energy. It's not enough just to bring down the energy of the spheres. What about all the energy the Satan took? So we have two jobs. The first job is to take back the energy that we gave the Satan, to bring it back in what's called the Sitra Kedusha, the side of holiness. Because right now it's in Sitra Achra, the other side, which is the side of the Satan. That's what it means, you see? So that's the first job. The second job is once we have all the Kedusha back in our hands, we now can bring down the rest of the Kedusha and transform this world into Olam Haba. Two jobs, you see. One is called Tahara. We need to purify, right? Therefore, we need to take back, okay, the Kedusha that he has. And the second thing is the concept of Kedusha is to bring it down. That's, by the way, why there are two Mashiachs. The Mashiach ben Yosef, and people make incredible amount of mistakes, astounding the ignorance out there. There are two Messiahs. Why? Because there are two jobs, you see. Originally, the first job was what? Just to avoid the Satan. And therefore, Adam Rishon was really Mashiach ben David. And when he failed, he gave 70 years of his life to the Mashiach ben David. He had to resurrect the life of Mashiach ben David. Why? Because he failed. And that was his original job, is to bring down the holiness. After that, right, when we gave the Satan, he gave power to the Satan because he sinned. So now you have to have a Mashiach ben Yosef, you see. And the Mashiach ben Yosef is the individual that fights the Satan and the nations of the world, you see. And he takes back all the Kedusha, you see. And once that happens, the Mashiach ben Yosef, which is a Messianic, he's a Messiah, don't get me wrong, okay? But he's a different type of Messiah than the Mashiach ben David. And then you have the Mashiach ben David, which is the real Messianic era, which I will talk about. Anyway, that's why there are two Messiahs, because there are two jobs as a result of the sin of Adam Harishon. Now, here's the way it works. If you do a mitzvah, you bring down the Kedusha. But if you do tshuva or suffer, you take it back from the Satan. You see, that's how it works. You see. So when a Jew repents, then what he really is doing is undoing the sin. He's saying, I'm sorry. I regret it. So automatically the Satan has to release the energy that he took from you because of your sin. And if a Jew suffers, not because he did a tshuva, but let's say he suffers, then the Satan has to do the same thing. He has to give back the energy, you see. So in the end, between the tshuva and the Yisurin, which is the Golus, that's why we're in Golus for 2,000 years, the Satan has to release all this energy back to the Jews. You see? This is the balance between the Jew and the Satan. Very interesting balance. And it's responsible for the entire history of man. It's fascinating to look. I do go into a lot of it in the original 25 hours if you want to look at that stuff. But I'm just telling you, this balance here between the Satan and Klal Yisrael and the Jewish people, who has the energy at any given moment? What's the balance? You have no idea how important that is. In other words, does he have more of the stuff and we have less? Or do we have the stuff and he has less? You see, that balance is the key hashgoch of the Rebbeinu Shalom, what's happening and so on. Great. Okay. Now, 4,000 years of Avraham Avinu. Okay? What is the 4,000 years about? Either to mitzvahs, tshuva, yisurin. That's what it's about, right? That's what the Jews are trying to do. One or the other. And you have Golus and so on, to take back and so on, right? And finally we come to the end. The end of time is called the termination phase. It's called the termination phase. That's interesting. It's the end phase, you see. What is the termination phase? You ever go to a play? A play has, let's say, 3 acts, right? It has 3 acts, right? Because, and then in the third act, you have what's called scene 1, scene 2, and scene 3. The whole play is busy developing the plot, the character development, and so on. But in the end, scene 3 of act 3, right, the play is no longer interested in developing the plot. What the play wants to do, very interesting, is it wants to end the play, the climax, right? So therefore, the focus of the last scene in the last act is, let's end it, right? Same idea. There's a concept called the termination phase. The termination phase is where God is no longer interested so much in getting the Jews to do the Tikon, because the Tikon is 98% finished. Now what God wants to do is bring the Mashiach to end the whole thing. And that's the termination phase. It means that the Tikon is almost done. Now, that termination phase has 3 subphases. One is called the Ikvus of the Mashiach, the footsteps of the Messiah. What does that mean? Is that we're so close that if the Mashiach was in front of us walking and he leaves in the mud his footsteps, after time it wears away. But we're so close behind him that we can actually see his footsteps. That's called the footsteps of the Messiah. Very close. The second phase, subphase, is called Aschalta de Geula, the beginning of redemption. That takes time. And the third subphase is called Yemais HaMashiach, the Messianic era. That's it. That's what we're all waiting for, okay? But what I want to do, as you will see now, is to show you basically where we are in this whole process. Now that you understand the different phases. There's a lot of ideas and details, but basically the Ikvis de Mashiach, which is the beginning of the termination phase, started in 1840. 1840. It's based on a Zohar. What does the Zohar says? The Zohar says a very interesting concept, and then what it alludes to. The Zohar, which of course I'm sure you ever heard, it's the textbook of Kabbalah, of the mystical aspect of Judaism. The Zohar says that, it says by Noach, by the flood, in the 600th year of the life of Noach, okay, then the flood happened, right? The waters of heaven, the waters of the earth poured forth, and the windows of heaven opened up and outpoured the water. Fine. So the Zohar says that from here we learn that in the 600th year, just like by Noach, in the 600th year of the last Tekufa, of the end of time, which is 5,600, the waters will pour forth, which means that there will be an incredible hispashtus chokhmah, incredible pouring forth of wisdom, without going into why, okay? And that, obviously, 1840 is 5,600. It is the 600th year of the 5,000th year, okay, which I will explain shortly. So that means in 5,600, which is 1840, there will come down an incredible amount of wisdom on the earth. What happened in 1840? Just think about it. The Industrial Revolution, science, Michael Faraday, then you had all the, physics and chemistry. The amount of discoveries that started from about 1840, it all started then. It's incredible what happened. And that's exactly what happened. Tremendous hispashtus chokhmah, a revelation of an enormous amount of wisdom came back. In fact, mankind changed radically from 1840, if you really begin to think about it and so on, So that's basically when it started, the concept of 1840, and we learned that from the Zohar of Noach. What does that mean? It means that we're near the end. Once that starts, if this type of wisdom comes down, next week actually I'm going to talk about that. But what it means is that there's an incredible amount of divine wisdom that comes down, which is really the beginning of the Messianic light, which I will explain next week, what that really means. In fact, I'll explain what science is really all about. What does it have to do with the Messiah, the Mashiach himself? But anyway, the main idea is that we're near the end, which means that the Satan has to give up most of his energy, and he's dying, because that's what it means. And therefore, we are very close to the end. Now, let me tell you this, which is very important. If Jews have to suffer in order to do the third Tikon device, there are only 8 nations that can make them suffer. That's it. And for them, it's great. Not because they want to make Jews suffer, which also happens to be true, but the idea is because God said that these 8 nations that I'm going to appoint to make the Jews suffer, I'm not just going to give my Jews, my people, my children to some lowly nation. I'm not going to have them go to Zimbabwe, right, and suffer from the Zimbabweans, right? No, because the indignity is too great. The nations that I'm going to give that will allow, I hope I don't insult the Zimbabweans, but anyway, I take it back. Anyway, you know what I'm going to do? Every nation that I give, that will be my agents to bring suffering on the Jews, because that's a third Tikon device, I'm going to make them to a world power. Okay, still suffering in different ways. There's persecutions, there's also assimilation, whatever, and so on. But at least it's a world power, so you can walk around with your head a little high. In any case, who are these 8 nations? Who are they? And they are the following. 1, Egypt was the first. Mitzrayim, that was the first, number 1. Second, and each one is different, and so on. The second one is Babylon, Bavel. They destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. I mean, Mitzrayim was the Shibud Mitzrayim, right? There was slaves in Egypt, right? Bavel destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, and Jews moved to Bavel with Daniel and so on, Nebuchadnezzar. That's the second. The third nation is Porus, Persia. Persia, of course, they had Haman, Ahasuerus, and so on, right? The fourth nation is Yavon, Greece. And Greece, of course, is Hanukkah, what the Greeks did and so on. The fifth nation is Rome. Beis HaMikdash, Second Temple, and so on. So there are 5 nations. I will mention the other 3 because they really come at the end of time, and I'm going to go much more heavy into 2 of them. Okay. The other 3 nations are Yishmael, the Arabs, or the Muslims. The 7th nation is Amalek, the Amalekites, whoever they are today, which is very interesting because Amalek isn't a nation, they are long ago assimilated. But Amalek, whoever has the characteristics of Amalek, which is unmitigated arrogance, and I'll talk about a little about that, who that is. But and then the last nation, the 8th nation, isn't really a nation, it's the Jews. Like it says in the prophet, from within you will come your destroyers. It's a famous Navi and so on, That's called the Erev Rav, okay? The Erev Rav are Jews that want to destroy, not Jews, Judaism, which I will talk about, okay? And that's a Navi. From within you will come your destroyers, which means that the Jews themselves, although not a real nation, but they are a segment of Jews, of course, that are really very bad, especially in the end of time. Now, I want to go into, each one of these have distinct characteristics which the Jews has to go through and whatever, be under their jurisdiction and dominion and so on, and suffer and so on. I'm going to go into Asav and the Erev Rav, a little more, and Yishmael. Actually, those are the 3. Okay. Who is Asav? Who is Rome? Rome? There's no Rome anymore. Rome disappeared either the original 2,000 years ago, or rather 1,500 years ago, or the Byzantines, also a long time ago, and so on. The Torah says there's Asav. Who is Asav? The Torah says Asav zu Edom. Asav is Edomites. The Edomites were a kingdom, whatever, and they are the nation that arose from Asav. Asav, we know, is the brother of Yaakov, right? Yaakov and Asav. And then the Edomites were the nation that came out of Asav. So that is Edom. Who is Edom? So the Gemara says that Edom is Roimi. Edom is Rome. Without going into how is that possible, I'm not getting into that. But Rome is Edom, which means that Rome is Asav. You see. Now, what was interesting is that since Asav, Edom, Rome, is the 5th nation that will persecute the Jews or make them suffer. So the question is, wait a minute, if the Jews are going to be involved in the Tikon until the end of time, that means Rome will dominate as an empire until now. That means we still will have Rome, right? Because they're the 5th and they dominate us, correct? So therefore, as long as we need, Golus by Rome, right, then Rome is going to be around today because they have to dominate us. So what God did is very interesting. He took Rome and he changed it into a religion. So therefore, the religion follows us, but not Rome. So he took away the concept of Asav, that it's no longer a political entity, it is rather a religion. And that religion will dominate us and persecute us. Who did Rome become? Christianity, obviously. If you've ever been in the Vatican is filled with Roman statues. Why? Because the Vatican is Christian, right? And it's religious and so on and so forth. Why would they have Roman statues? And the answer is because, according to Hashkafa, the spiritual heir of Rome is Christianity. So therefore, Christianity, which is the Vatican, has all those Roman statues in it because they took it over. They took over the job of Asav, Edom, to persecute the Jews and so on. Which is also, there's another very interesting idea, 2 ideas. One is that Rome, Christianity, became Western civilization. So Western civilization is the last great exile of the Jews. That's really what's happening, and so on. Now, Western civilization, of course, has dominated the Jews for an enormous amount of time. And if you look at this, where is the seat of Christianity? And the answer is the Vatican, right? In Italy, which of course is Rome. If you take the word Vatican and write it in Hebrew, Vatikan, and you jumble the letters, it will spell Tikon. Yes, the word Vatican jumbled in Hebrew spells Tikon. Because the essential of Tikon of Klal Yisrael for the last 2,000 years has been Christianity. And Jews have suffered terribly under Christianity. There are ways of seeing this, but the amount of slaughter that the Jews have experienced at the hands of the Christians is beyond belief. Historians estimate that 2,000 years ago, there were 10 million Jews, approximately from 8 to 10 million Jews. 2,000 years ago, in time of Rome. Historians also estimate that 2,000 years ago, there were 25 million Chinese. Interesting. How many Chinese people are there today, 2,000 years later? 1.3 billion. How many Jews are there today? Well, 2,000 years ago, we numbered about 10 million, 14 million. Can you tell me how in the world, after 2,000 years, there's only 4 million Jews more? Where are they? And the answer is destroyed. Basically, we really should have been over 500 million Jews. Because according to normal population dynamics, right? If there are 25 million to 1.3 billion in 2,000 years, so if we're 10 million, we should be at least 500 million Jews. Can you imagine, where are these 500 million Jews? They're gone, destroyed, slaughtered. By who? The major element of slaughter, of course, was the Christians. Terrible what they've done to the Jews. In any case, therefore, you can begin to feel and see what the Golus has done to the Jewish people. Terrible slaughter. Could you imagine 500 million Jews? You can imagine how many shuls there would be? You know, it's incredible. And that, you begin to understand the slaughter of the Jews. We don't realize that. But if you ask yourself, how could there be only 14 million Jews if we were 10 million Jews 2,000 years ago? But not only that, think about it. We started 2,000 years before the Romans, Avram Avinu, right? So that's 4,000 years ago. How could there be 14 million Jews from a nation that existed 4,000 years? We should be 2 billion Jews, right? Can you imagine how many arguments there would be, right? And why isn't there? Because the slaughter of the nations. That's what anti-Semitism in many ways has caused us and so on. And anyway, so therefore, this is Asav, okay. Asav, Edom, Rome, Christianity, Western civilization. Now, wait a minute. But Western civilization is divided into several segments or sections. Why? Because Asav had 3 characteristics. The first characteristic Asav had is what? He was tremendous gaiva, tremendous arrogant person. Vayives Asav es haBechorah, and Asav despised the birthright. That's arrogance. He was also a tremendous fraud, mirma. He deceived Isaac, Yitzchak, all the time, right? He was an imposter, you see. He couldn't say what he was. He used to hide the fact that he used to go out and kill people, whatever he did, right? And then he'd come back and say, do I have to give tithe on salt? What a fraud. The third aspect of Asav is taiva, pleasure. Asav was incredibly into taiva, without getting into which taiva he loved. But he was a tremendous Baal taiva. That is why Western civilization is divided into 3 sections. Right? Gaiva, taiva, and mirma, fraud, deception. The gaiva is Russia, communism. The aspect of gaiva of Asav is so dangerous, it can only survive 70 years, which is what communism did. Russia is really Christian because it's the Russian Orthodox Church. But for 70 years, it was atheism, arrogance that took over. That's the gaiva of Asav. The mirma, the fraud. Who's the fraud of Asav? Europe. Europe is a fraud. You know, they have Christians. More Jews were killed in the name of their guy than all wars combined. And this is Europe, because most of the Jewish history is really in Europe, you know. In any case, Europe is the fraud. And they've always been a fraud. That's what the European civilization is all about. They don't have the guts to come out and say the truth or whatever. Anyway, and the taiva of Asav, we know what the taiva is, America. Western civilization, America's taiva, you know? It's like you sit down with a guy and say, let's talk philosophy. So the guy says, philosophy? Okay, let's go to a restaurant and talk over, talk over a meal, good hot meal, right? Whatever, great steak. Anyway. America's the taiva. Where do you see that? And that's when you begin to realize that's the clue in terms of what's happening. And that is that, so we have the gaiva and the mirma, the fraud of Asav, and America's the taiva. America's really the toiv sheba Asav, the mildest part of Asav. You see, America's a very good country. And it's the mildest part of Asav. You know where you see this? Remember Asav? What was the biggest mitzvah he ever did? Keep it over aim. He was enormously respectful. You tell me which country has Father's Day and Mother's Day? Interesting, isn't it? It's America. You see, why? Because that's the Tov Sheb Asav. It's the mildest part of Asav, and so on. I realize it sounds a little, but they are the Tov Sheb Asav, yes, which has enormous consequences later on. So that's really what America is. That's Asav is divided. Western civilization is divided into three parts. Okay, the second, of course, is Yishmael, the Arabs. The Arabs are really the Muslims. Only 10% of the Muslim world is Arab. The rest are all like Indonesia is the largest Muslim population in the world. Turkey and Iran, they're not Arabs, they're Muslims. But it's the Muslims that represent Yishmael. And they clearly have dominated the Jews for hundreds of years, 1,500 years since Muhammad, and so on. So that's Yishmael. The last one is the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav is what's called a mixed multitude, but it's very important to understand who they are and what they are, because in the end, they are the greatest enemy of Israel, the Jews themselves. The Jews destroy the Jews, even though they don't want to destroy Jews, but in the end, that's what happens. How does it all start? It all starts by Yaakov. When Yaakov was going to meet Asav, he was very much afraid. So he prays to God in Vayishlach. He prays to God, and he says, "Hatzileni no miad ochi miad Asav." Save me from my brother Asav. Now we know Asav is his brother, so why should it say, "Save me from my brother Asav"? And the idea to that is Yaakov was saying, look, save me from this guy, whether he comes to me as my brother, which means, hey, brotherhood, right? Or when he comes to me as an enemy called Asav. You see, why? Because the problem is, when you have a brother, you see, you don't recognize him as an enemy. This is the problem. So Yaakov said, when Asav comes to me as a brother, right, save me, because I don't even recognize him as an enemy. And save me, right, when he comes as Asav, which is clearly an enemy. That's the concept of Hatzileni. And it was the Erev Rav that did the Chet Egel, basically, right? The Erev Rav has been terrible. It's Jews trying to destroy, in many ways, the Judaism of other Jews. Why are they so powerful, the Erev Rav? I'll tell you why. Because the Erev Rav is a tumor. Why is cancer so powerful? Because cancer is self. The body does not recognize self. Because a cancer cell is really self. It's you. Except the breakdown has been in how many times it can multiply. So the body doesn't attack a cancer cell because it says, hey, the cancer cell is really self, right? It's because the body doesn't recognize it as an enemy. That's why cancer is really a brother. It's an och. The body does not recognize it as what? As an enemy. That's why cancer is so powerful. Same thing with the Erev Rav. It's Jewish. Hey, he loves me. He's a Jew. Even though he's trying to destroy my religion, we don't recognize that as an incredible enemy of what he wants to do. In other words, the essential idea of an Erev Rav is a Jew who doesn't want to destroy Jews at all. He could say, I love Jews, but he wants to destroy the bond that exists between the Jews and God. The whole bond, the whole agreement is the Torah itself. And he wants to replace the Torah with something else. Whether it be replace the Torah with the state of Israel. What do you have to be Jewish for? I mean, what do you need this for? We're Israelis. That's one way of doing it. It's always trying to replace the uniqueness of a Jew with something else, you see, or culture. Hey, of course the Bible is great. It's great literature, but then so is Shakespeare, you see. Or, look, we have gefilte fish, right? That's what makes us Jewish, right? Or matzah brei, knedlach, whatever you're into, right? And so, in other words, what he tries to do is destroy the unique bond that the Jew has with God. And that's really everything. There is nothing but that bond. That's an Erev Rav, you see. Very dangerous because they profess love of Jews. That's not the problem. But they destroy the ruchnius, the whole olam haba, future world of a Jew. And as far as God is concerned, that is the greatest destruction you could do to his people. There is nothing greater. Because if you kill a Jew physically, he's dead here, but at least he gets olam haba. You destroy his religion, he doesn't get olam haba, so you have destroyed him for eternity. What a difference, you see. Now I want to say something, that the Jewish people are not Erev Rav. They're just Amaratzim. Jewish people are assimilated, they're intermarried, and so on. A Jewish person is not an Erev Rav. He's just Rachmanis. He's a lost Jew. An Erev Rav is a leader of the Jews, you see. And if you have to identify some of them, in America it's the Reformed movement and the conservative movement and the Reconstructionists that have destroyed Judaism in America, and how the state of Israel can even entertain these people when they realize that the Reform movement has destroyed the bond that exists between the Jew and his God, how they can even entertain legitimatizing any aspect of them. And in Eretz Israel, unfortunately, it's the Zionists, because it's one thing, you can have religious Zionism where Eretz Israel is part of whatever, if you believe that it's part of the prophecy that, of course, we get Israel back, of course, right? But to say that Israel replaces Judaism or the Torah is terrible, destroys the Jews. So in many ways, the Zionists, they're the Erev Rav, the leaders, and so on. Now that you understand the definition. In the end of time, all three of these dominate. Christianity, Western civilization, Yishmael, the Arabs, and the Erev Rav. That's what dominates. Those are the last three subjugations of the Jewish people in the end of time. And right now, to understand the termination phase, that's really what we have to focus on. You see, great, okay. We are in the end time. What does that mean? That means for 4,000 years, we have been involved in the Tikon process. But now, the Tikon process is almost over, if not over. We are now involved in the Messianic process. Remember what I told you? We are in the concept called Aschalta de Geula, which is astounding. Because this is Act 3, Scene 3, you see. And as far as I'm concerned, we are in the Messianic process. We have left Ikvus de Mashiach. We are now Aschalta de Geula, which is the real beginning of the Messianic process. And we have to understand, and that's, what does that really mean? So I need to tell you the concept of a creation calendar, which is very valuable to understand. We know that the world was created in 6 days, and we know also that the Gemara says that the world will exist 6,000 years. Shisa alfei shnin hevu alma. The Gemara says in several places that the world will exist for 6,000 years, and that's it. After 6,000 years, it's over. Okay? And by the way, the Mashiach has to come before the end of the 6,000 years. He comes before, and his reign ends in the 6,000th year. And the 6,000th years is the English year 2240. It's very close, 2240. It's maybe 223 years to go, whatever, and so on. Okay. And after 2240, then what begins is the Zikuch. If you remember what I told you, the world begins to reverse itself physically, and it becomes a spiritual world. Takes a little time, but the process of Zikuch begins in the year 6000, which is the English year 2240. Great. So 6,000 years. Why? Because there's 6 days of creation. Each day of creation is equivalent to 1,000 years. Like David HaMelech says, 1 day in your eyes is like 1,000 days in us. So therefore, 6 days in your eyes is 6,000 years in us. Now, in this cheshbon, in this calculation, if you think about it, the most important day in many ways is the last day, 5,000. The year 5,000 is equivalent to Friday, the 6th day. But Friday is Erev Shabbos, isn't it? So Erev Shabbos is when you begin to think about Shabbos. That's why Friday, which is the year 5,000, that's the beginning of the 6,000th year, 5,000. The English year 5,000 was 1240, and there are many things that happened, which I'm not going to go into. So therefore, that's Erev Shabbos. And on Erev Shabbos, you begin to think of putting up, getting ready for Shabbos. Therefore, there are many messianic phenomena that occurred in the year 1240 without getting into it, and that begins the process of the end. Therefore, we are really in the last day. We're Friday, right, which is 5,000, Friday, and that's Erev Shabbos. Now, in that period of time, what is significant is the last 250 years. The year 5,750, okay, which was 1890 or 19, more accurately, September of 1989 was the Hebrew year 5750. If you look at that on the creation calendar, that is 12 o'clock Friday. Because remember, 1,000 years is one day, you see. Actually, when you think about it, every hour is 42 years and 8 months. Calculate. Therefore, 12 o'clock noon on the creation calendar is the year 5750, which is the English year 1989 September, because that's when Rosh Hashanah started. If you think about that, what does that mean? That means 12 o'clock noon, what happens? It becomes afternoon. The sun begins to set, never to rise again, because it's the last day. And when do you begin thinking about Shalom? I mean, this is, the women know this, right? Right? You don't think about it for, an hour before Shabbos. You think about it by Chatzos, 12 o'clock. Am I right, women? Yeah, you know, right? That's when you would think. So therefore, the process of the Erev Shabbos, the preparation, enormously intensifies and accelerates after noon, you see. So that's 5750 is 12 noon, you see. And on 12 noon it says, the Navi, Li'es Erev Yihyeh Or, at the time of afternoon, Erev, evening, will begin the light. And when does that start? It's called Beinu Arbayim. After 12 o'clock, that's when it starts. Therefore, we can expect, just on this creation calendar, that incredible events will occur from September 1989, which is 5750, which is 12 o'clock noon. Is that what happened? In October, November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall collapsed. One, let me tell you what's been happening since then. An incredible acceleration of events, each one having profound meaning in the Messianic process. One, okay, the Berlin Wall collapses. A year later, communism collapses. Remember they kidnapped Gorbachev, right? And they held him for 3 days, and then everybody went wild, so they brought him back, and then Yeltsin took over. You remember Yeltsin? Should I say of blessed memory? Anyway, he took over, but what we do realize is that that's the fall of communism. 1990, 91, right? Astounding. Not only that, the World Trade Center in 1993 was bombed once by the Arabs, and then of course 9/11, twice. Not only that, we see the rise of Islam, right? You never saw Arabs before. When did the first Intifada start? Right around 1989. That's when it started. Why? How do we understand the rise of Islam? You never saw people walking around with bed sheets on their head, right? But now you saw guys walking around with bed sheets on their head, right? You saw Arabs, and they were all over the place. That's called a kafir, but it's still a bed sheet. You saw Arabs walking around. It was incredible what was happening. You see, why now? Why all of a sudden are the Arabs coming out and dominating, especially in Israel? But more than that, all over the world. They're all over the place. Why? And not only that, we are witnessing the fall of the Arabs. Every Arab state is basically a failed state. It's incredible. They rise and fall. Take a look at this, right? What do we have? We have Libya, Egypt, Lebanon, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, right? Yemen. It's incredible. And the Jews have not fired a bullet. Think about that. That's why the whole tactic of the Israeli army is different, because there are no enemies really. Yeah, they're terrorists, but the enemies are no longer the nations called Arabs. I mean, Syria can't make war. It's being destroyed in front of us. All of them are being destroyed. Jordan is going to totter, right? It's already tottering, and Abdullah is very anxious, obviously. And Egypt is tottering because of ISIS and so on. It's astounding where God says, and this is the beauty of the Messianic era, there are 3 verses that you need to know, and they always characterize a Messianic process. 1, Even moasu haboinim hoisu l'rosh pino, the stone that the builders hated, despised, that became the cornerstone of the entire building. See, So there's always this guy. The second thing is of an ahapechu, that all of a sudden it became the cornerstone overnight. Shocking. And the last one is that you don't have to do a thing, like we had in last week's Parsha B'Shalach. Hisyatzvu ru'u, God says, don't do anything. Just watch what I'm going to do. That type of hashgocha is beyond belief, because it means that you don't have to really do anything. God just says, don't do anything, just watch me. And God just wiped out the entire Egyptian army, which is one of the greatest displays of divine providence and divine power the world has ever seen. I mean, the miracles of Kriyas Samsef is a midrashim on it, and so on and so forth. Those three concepts, this being despised, one, that it's overturned overnight, and that God does it without your help, is Messianic. And this is what we begin to see, what is happening today. This whole concept and so on and so forth, okay? And not only that, but in the last, like I say, since 1990, what is that, 27 years, that's all it is. But look at what it's happened. The growth of science is enormous. You have any idea what's going on in the scientific world? You know how many articles are published daily? Daily. 7,500 articles are published daily. You see, that's over 2,500,000 articles yearly. In journals, that's the frontier of knowledge. At that rate, the sum total of human knowledge doubles every 5.5 years. At that rate. Do you ever see such a hispashtus chokhmah? And there's a reason for it, right? Which is also incredible. Then you have the rise of the internet. You see, what is the internet really? I mean, in the beginning it's used for tumah. But the internet is really global connectivity. It allows everybody in the globe to be connected. You see? And that's been going wild for the last 27 years. And then there's the whole concept of wireless, where a guy sitting in the Sahara can tune in real time on anybody on the internet. Because the internet allows a Mashiach to get on and to teach them Ruchnius globally without having to be anywhere, which is interesting. So you have that, Then you have the ingathering of the exiles. The Jews are leaving all the countries, all over the place. And they're coming back to Eretz Yisrael. In the last 27 years, millions of Jews have come back to Eretz Yisrael. But what's even more important is that the Jews are no longer subjugated by many nations, you see. So that's what's called the kibbutz golius. Then, of course, the growth of Israel is phenomenal. Israel, a little tiny nation that's about as big as New Jersey, right? You can barely find it on a map in the world. It is so tiny, Think of it. Israel has 10,000 square kilometers, if I remember correctly. Jordan has 95,000 square kilometers. What a difference, right? There are over 22 million square kilometers in the 22 Arab nations. And of course, they have no room for the PLO. Nothing, right? But the incredible is the growth of Israel as a world leader. Think about that. Israel is a world leader in what? Medicine, in agriculture, in water conservation, high tech, right? Security, yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, How is it possible that a nation, there's only 8 million people, that's basically a dot. You see, more than that. Do you know that Nobel Prize winners, the Jews number less than 1/4% of the world's population? But do you know that the amount of Nobel laureates, the Jews have 33% of all Nobel Prizes ever given? You ever see something like that? No wonder the Koreans, they're learning Talmud, by the way, because they figured out that the reason why the Jews are so smart is because Talmud. So they're actually translating the Talmud in South Korean. Because people realize there's something here. It doesn't make any sense. And that's happened in what? In basically the last 27 years, And then, of course, you have Obama. Then you have the Trump phenomenon. You have Clinton, the stock market collapse, right? What is going on? Well, guess what? I'm going to try to cover all these topics, But I'm just showing you what has been happening since 5,750, which is 1989, is beyond belief. Why? Because the key concept is the acceleration. God wants to end the process. That's why. You know, it used to be in history, you'd have to have at least 100 years between one event and the next. Today, all this has happened in 27 years. And let me tell you a very interesting Zohar. The Zohar says, Tchias HaMesim, which is resurrection of the dead, okay? Resurrection of the dead. And that happens after the Mashiach ben David, the Davidic Messiah, comes. So the Zohar says the following. There's an argument. How long will Tchias HaMesim be? So the Zohar has an argument. One person says, authority says, that Tchias HaMesim will ensue 210 years. That's how long. But wait a minute. In order for the Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead, to ensue 210 years, right, it has to start right after the Mashiach ben David. But that means the Mashiach ben David has to come 210 years before the end. Well, what did I say the end was? Year 6,000. So if you subtract 210 years from 6,000, what year does it come out to? 5,790. Can you tell me how far that is from now? 13 years? That's frightening. That means, according to that Zohar, oh, and by the way, the other person says that the Tchias HaMesim will take place 214 years, which is 11 years from now. But even if we give, the other one who says 210 years, and so on, excuse me, you tell me in the year 2030, Mashiach is here? Yes, that's what it seems so, right, according to that Zohar. But then you realize what's happening. If we're that close, then there's an enormous amount of acceleration of what's going on, you see. And that's why you're finding things that would have taken 1,000 years to happen. Look at this, right? Is happening in what? 27 years. Because God wants to end the entire matter. And we are now basically aschat de geula. It's no longer ikvis and Mashiach. We are mamish in the messianic process of the beginning of redemption, which is in many ways an astounding concept. Great. Now let's go into history. I'm going to talk about Obama. How's that? I realize he left, but you got to hear this. Okay? Who is Obama? How did he become president? I want to tell you something. Obama became president, it's a nes niglo, let's face it. The man had no experience whatsoever, nothing. The highlight of his experience was a community organizer. Wow. Could you imagine? He had a resume that said community organizer, right? So community organizer, so he got rid of that job, so they could find no better job than him after community organizer than to be the president of the United States. You believe this? And not only that, he was an incredible security risk. Why would they take a guy like that with Reverend Wright? Remember that? And he allied himself with so many different terrorists and so on. Without, how does a guy like this make it? Right? Let me tell you what's happening. And then you're going to understand from this alone enormous amount of what's happening and what's behind the incredible opposition to Trump. Because this is abnormal. This has never happened in U.S. history. Never. So you have to understand what's going on. Okay, first idea. You have to understand what is behind everything, and you will see how, is the Satan is dying. That's right. The great satanic figure, Satan, is dying. 98, maybe 99%, maybe more, of the Kedusha, the force that he has given back to the Jewish people. And he is almost bankrupt. And he knows it. He's dying. What do angels do who die? Right? Who are dying? They explode. It's like a nova, a star. When a star explodes, what does it do? It explodes, but it draws in all the energy, and it explodes to such an incredible outburst of energy that it equals the amount of energy it puts out can equal the amount of energy of the entire galaxy. Could you imagine the energy it explains? The same thing with the Satan. The Satan is not going to be done in so quickly. He's desperate to survive. That's the key in understanding. Now, what does that mean? Here's what's happening. I'll give you an example. A general. Imagine a general is making a war with, let's say, General A. He's making a war with Nation B, right? And he's only down to 6 days of firepower. After 6 days, he's finished. Okay? 6 days. And after the 6th day, or I should say 7 days. Okay. So what does he do? He only has 3 strategies that he can employ. After that, he's finished. First strategy is called the Great Bluff. What he does is he takes 6 days' worth of his firepower and he throws it against the enemy, Nation B, hoping to bluff them because they're going to take a look at this and say, this is incredible. If this guy has this kind of power left, they're going to sue for peace. So he does that. He blows out 6 days of firepower. I mean, everything, the missiles, the bombs, everything. 6 days, right? In one shot. What happens? Fails. The enemy still continues fighting him. Bad news, because he's now down to 1 day of firepower. So what does he do? Second strategy. It's called to try to break the resolve of the enemy, even to make war. So what he's going to do is send in dissidents. You know, he's going to send guys of his nation into the enemy nation and try to break their resolve. Let's make love, not war. Remember the Vietnam, where people were saying, well, what do we have to fight for? That's one of the ways of winning is by breaking the resolve of the enemy, even to make that. So he does that. He sends guys in, and they try to break the resolve of the enemy. Fails. So what does he do? He's got the last strategy, this general. What strategy is that? He has to call an ally that has more troops, more armaments, firepower, and he does that. Fine. Now this is a marshal. Let's take a look at the Sultan. The Sultan does the exact same thing. And now you begin to understand historical events from a whole different perspective. Now forget about Israeli papers, New York Times. You begin to understand what is happening because it's, in many ways, it's Shemayim, it's heavenly. The wars are happening in heaven. The whole concept, the shift of power is all there, and then it manifests itself here. So what is he doing? Well, the first Sultan is dying. He's got 6 days worth of firepower left, which means he has 98%. He's got 2% of energy left. That's it. So what does he do? He throws it out, the Great Bluff. You see, trying to frighten the nation. What historical event corresponds to the Great Bluff? And the answer is the Holocaust. What does that mean? The Holocaust has many reasons, but I'm going to mention one which is very important. What the Sultan did is he gathered all the nations of the world, America, England, Germany, the whole Eastern Europe, France, all of them to destroy the Jews. Right? That's what he did. That's his firepower. The nations of the world that want to do evil and are influenced by him, that's his firepower. You see, what do you want to do? To kill the Jews. But wait a minute. He doesn't get anything by killing a Jew. The only way the Sultan is yonik, which means nourishes from Kedusha, energy, is if the Jew sins. If a Jew dies, he doesn't get anything. So then why would the Holocaust be some type of a solution? And the answer is because it's not the death of the Jew he wanted, really. What he wanted is that if 6 million Jews die, which they did, then the Jews would give up God. That's why. He wanted to break and destroy the emunah of Klal Yisrael. Because the Jews would say, where is God? How can he do this to us? Right? Then let's chuck religion and forget about it. And then the Jews would sin, and then what can he do? Eat from their sins. That's that's one of the important ideas, is that the Sultan tried to bring it about to destroy the faith of the Jew, the emun of Klal Yisrael. Very important idea. You see, that's the Great Bluff. And which is interesting, because he look what he did. He got the whole world against the Jew. That's what he did. Every nation was involved at some level in either killing Jews or aiding and abetting. For instance, England. Do you know England is responsible for all of this? It's responsible for the Arab problem. Because what they did, they issued the white paper. They stopped the Jews from coming in, I think in 1938, and they allowed the Arabs to come in because the Arabs were starving in their countries. That's why most Arabs really come from Syria, and so on. But in any case, that's what he tried to do, but he failed. The Sultan failed. Why? Because the Jews after the Holocaust are slowly coming back, regaining religion, more tradition, and so on. So what the second thing the Sultan do? The Sultan did what's called, after the Great Bluff, is to send dissidents, people into the other camp the enemy to try to break their resolve. Who are the greatest enemies of this, the greatest warriors of the Satan? And the answer is the Erev Rav, because they are Jews that want to destroy Judaism, not Jews. So what did he do? He gave Israel to the Zionists. He was able to mokatrig. Not that he has power, don't get me wrong, the Satan is powerless, but the weapon of the Satan is kitrugim, prosecutions. And he knows exactly who sins and what, and he's able to go in front of the heavenly tribunal, you see, and prosecute. And that's how he wins in judgment. So therefore, who was the one who founded the state of Israel in 1948? The Zionists. What did they do? What did they do to all the religious Jews coming in? They sent them to kibbutzim to destroy their religion. Why? Because they knew that these people are not going to vote them in. So as a result of that, right, what they did is they shmarted them up. They made them irreligious. I mean, we're talking about the Yemenite kids. I mean, it's like, I mean, you ever go to Tel Aviv these days? You see what's doing there? It's like, what? This is Israel? It's like, what is this? This is the result of the enormous campaign that the early settlers of Israel decided to do to destroy religion of the Jews, the Torah. And this is the result, you see. And that was the second great strategy of the Satan, is to destroy, to send dissidents, which is the Erev Rav, the leaders, to destroy the religion of the Jews. And then what do? They'll sin. If they sin, he can eat. Got it? That failed, because Jews are coming back. So therefore the Satan has to enter the last strategy. Only one strategy left. What is that? I need to contact an ally to do what? To get what? To get more armaments, right? More soldiers and so on. Hey, but wait a minute. There is nobody. There is no ally to the Satan. The only one who could bring down the divine energy into this world is the Jews, right? Or the Satan that takes from the Jews. There is nobody else. But there is. There's only one other nation that can access divine energy. Interesting. There's only one nation that can do it. Who is that? The Arabs. Why? Because Avram Avinu said to Avram Avinu said when he was praying that he should have a child, Yitzhak, and so on, right? So he figured, I have Yishmael, right? So he prayed to God, Lu Yishmael yichye lefanecha. Alavai Yishmael should live before you. So the Maharami Prague says an incredible thing. What he said was, let Yishmael live before you and not derive his energy from the Satan, which means he can access Kedusha straight from you, as long as he does what he has to do, which is the Milah, circumcision, and so on. And therefore, Arabs, Muslims, which is amazing, Yishmael, which are fundamentally Arabs, can take from the divine energy from God besides the Jews. So here's what happens. The Satan walks over to the angel of Yishmael, right? Because every nation has an angel, right? Because the Satan is almost bankrupt. He goes over to Yishmael and says, okay, let's make a deal. You have energy. You have this ore and so on and so forth. And I'm running out of this stuff, right? Let's make a deal. I want your people, your energy to help me survive. So the Malach of Yishmael says, no problem. I'll do it on one condition. Until now, who is your major nation? Edom, Asav, Christianity. Those are that's the Bechor of the Satan. I want Yishmael, my nation, to be the head nation of all. You see, I want my nation to supplant a Christianity. That's what he says, Yishmael. That's what the angel says. And the Satan, of course, says, it's a deal. And then all of a sudden you see, it's incredible, the Arabs rise all over the world, you see. They rise and they begin to dominate Europe, right? And not only that, the greatest trick that the Satan did was he took a guy who was fundamentally a Muslim, Obama, and he put him as head of the United States. Who would ever think that the president of the United States would be a practicing, basically, a Muslim, a hidden Muslim? That's really what he is. He's Ishmael, and so on. In fact, that's why he bowed to Saudi Arabia when he met him, because he was born, okay, he says he wasn't born in, in Kenya, whatever, and so on. Yeah, okay. Anyway, but the main idea is that, He was certainly brought up in Islamic schools and so on. He believes in Islam. Why do you think he loves Islam? Why he's so much against Israel? Because really, he's a hidden, he's not even that hidden anymore, a Muslim and so on. And that was the deal. That what the Sultan did was incredible. The deal was that Obama, which is a Muslim basically, right, should become the president of the greatest Catholic nation in the world. Christian. Yes. Incredible. And therefore Obama becomes the president. Amazing. If that's the case, if Obama now becomes the president, Obama now has several jobs. Now you begin to understand why he did what he did. You're a very interesting guy, Obama. You know, very interesting guy. Now you begin to understand what he did and why. Obama, therefore, now has several jobs, which he is unaware of. The first thing you have to understand is ISIS. ISIS is a product. ISIS is a very unusual form of Islam. It's radical. It's extremist. They kill everybody. You never found that. I mean, the Arabs did that, but never in such a vicious way. Because you notice what they preach is they want a caliphate, right? In other words, it's an extreme form of Islam. They want to overthrow everybody and just install the sultan, you see, a caliph. ISIS is the product of a sultan that's dying, or rather Yishmael that's dying. Because even the Malach of Yishmael, as we will see, is also dying. Yishmael is dying, so therefore he's trying to recapture what he can do, which is to bring the Muslims back, as we will see. But in any case, what's interesting is the job of Obama. Take a look. If he's a Muslim and he's representing Islam, and that's the deal to save the Sultan, so he's going to diminish America. Of course, he's got to diminish America. Why? Because notice, if you have two brothers that became king, one will always kill the other, right? In order not to have a rival. So what he's trying to do, therefore, is to diminish America. Islam has to try to diminish America, so the stature of Islam rises with the diminishment of America. And that's exactly what he did for 8 years. He has made America in many ways the laughing stock of the world. I mean, everybody laughs at America now. You know, it's not only the economy and it's maybe Wall Street is making money, but Main Street is not. There's so much things going on in America that is no good. The foreign policies, the economy. He's reduced the military to terrible. What he's done. Why? Because that's his job, is to diminish Edom, which is America, the Toif Shebe Asav. That's his job. Second job is to empower the Arabs, because he's basically a Muslim, and that's exactly what he's done. No, in fact, his first act when he got in was to call Abbas and talk to him. You believe this? That's his first act. What does that tell you? You see, and not only that, he's always empowering the Arabs, no matter what the Jews do. You know, the war of Operation Edge, right? They were shelling Israeli cities, and he's talking about Israel stepping back, right? And making a truce. Is this guy for real? Because he's a Muslim, and therefore his job is to empower the Arabs. That's his second job. Third job is interesting, is to designate the end of time. Do you know that the end of time has been designated? And he did it. Obama. How? There's a medrash. It's a Yalkut Shimoni in Sefer Yeshayahu. It says the following: Bishana shed ben David bo, in the year that Ben David, Mashiach Ben David comes. It says this, right? It's amazing when you read this stuff, because the Midrashim were written 2,000 years ago, and the way they accurately portray is just incredible. What will happen 2,000 years later? So it says in the year that Ben David bo, right? It says Poras, Iran, right, will incite or instigate a war against Arabia. Okay? And then it says that the whole world and the Arab is going to seek counsel with Edom. Interesting. And then it says that Poras, Persia, which is Iran, is going to begin to destroy the world. And then all of a sudden, there's a baskol that comes out that says, Higia Zman Gulaschem. This is the last war. A baskol, a divine voice comes out and says, this is the last war. The time of your redemption has arrived. All that I have done is only for you. That's what God says. Which tells us what? That the concept of Iran, how in the world could Iran threaten the world? Nuclear. This is a medrash that was written 2,000 years ago. Yet they saw that in the end of time, Iran is going to threaten the entire world, which clearly means they knew the concept of that it's going to be able to have nuclear weapons. And that's exactly what happened, you see. So Obama has allowed Iran to become nuclear. So in that sense, he has designated the end of time, because that is the end, you see. So Obama has actually done that. He has designated the end of time. So that's another thing that Obama has done. I mean, this guy's just incredible, in terms of what he does for the Mashiach. I mean, the end of Mashiach is going to give me Yasher Koyach. I could not have come without you. That's what he's going to tell. He's going to tell Obama, Now, you think that's good, you should see something else Obama did. Goig and Magog. Gog from the land of Magog. What is that? We know in the end of time, Gog from the land of Magog will war against Israel and against Jerusalem. Okay? And that war will be a very difficult war. What does that mean? Why is there a Gog and Magog? What does it mean? It all starts from Egypt. What Gog and Magog really is, it's a second attempt or resurgence of evil to try to destroy the Jews. That's what Kriyas Yamsuf is. All of a sudden, the Egyptians realized they were finished, and all of a sudden they said, why do we let the Jews go? And they ran after them by Yamsuf. So that was a second attempt to try to destroy them. You see, that's Kriyas Yamsuf. That's the concept of Gog and Magog. When the nations of the world realize that they are losing, they're losing their grip on the world, they will go against Israel, you see, because they realize that their way of living is dying. That's really what it is. A resurgence, it's an attempt of evil to regroup and to try to conquer Israel. But that will be what? It will be against Israel, the nation of Israel, and also and Yerushalayim. Now it's very interesting, very interesting. Who is Gog and Magog? Interesting. Gog and Magog is what's called flexible. God can designate who he wants to be Gog and Magog. But Gog and Magog can only happen, one, if it's against the Jews in general. Two, if the Mashiach is alive at that time. Because it's really a Messianic war. That's really what it is. It's a war after the Mashiach has come. So basically, for Gog and from the land of Magog to happen, basically it has to be against the Jews in general, and it has to be with the Mashiach basically alive, which is interesting. Now, we understand its historical origin, but it's interesting. Chizkiyahu, the Melech Yehuda, right? Sancherib made war against Chizkiyahu, right? He surrounded Jerusalem with 185,000 soldiers, unheard of. So Chizkiyahu was a tremendous tzaddik. He said to God, listen, I don't have the power to stop this. It's ridiculous, You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to sleep. You take care of them. I mean, what a strategy, right? I can't do this. So Chizkiyahu went to sleep, surrounded by 185,000 soldiers that were going to kill everybody, right? The next morning, the Jews walked out. 185,000 people died. And there is no disease in the world that can kill with that speed. Even Ebola can't do this. You see, that was a miracle which is beyond comprehension. So Chizkiyahu should have sang Shira, like Kriyas Yamsuf, Shira, but he didn't, for whatever reason. So the Chazal tell us that God wanted to make Sancherib Goig that would war against Chizkiyahu, and Chizkiyahu was the Mashiach, and that would be against Mashiach and Klal Yisrael. But since Chizkiyahu did not sing Shira, God took away that position. It's over with. It has to continue. He almost was Mashiach, right? So what do we see? That the concept of Gog and Magog, which is our origin in Kriyas Yamsuf, right, splitting the Red Sea, that could have happened with Chizkiyahu, and it didn't, so we see there's a flexibility. Okay, when's the next time? A lot of interesting times, but let me tell you something very interesting. What is critical to know, what the concept of the next time, the war of Gog and Magog, God divided into three parts. That's right. There are three events that is Gog and Magog. And there's a reason for that. Because the war of Gog and Magog is very bad. Because Chazal say in Sanhedrin that only one or two families of Jews will survive that war. And not only that, but the Mashiach himself, which is Mashiach ben Yosef, will die. Okay, so what God did is very interesting. I'll tell you, don't worry. That's the bad news. The bad news is that one or two families of Jews will survive, and Mashiach ben Yosef himself dies, which is like incredible, right? That's the bad news. The good news is that God changed the plan. What does that mean? What he did is he took the war of Gog and Magog, remember, which is the war of Gog against the Jewish nation, and also a Mashiach, basically. And what he did is he made it into three sections. The first real war of Gog is Germany in World War I. Germany is Amalek. Without getting into that, Germany is really Amalek. That's who they are at that time, certainly. Okay? World War I is the war of Gog and Magog, part one, you see. And they destroyed 1,500 communities of Jews. It was terrible what they did to the Jews in World War I. World War II is the second part of Gog. But this time, it was Gog himself who was Hitler, Yamach Shemoy. Germany under Hitler is Gog. In many ways, you don't realize something. Hitler is a messianic figure. He's the Messiah of the Satan. Because a messianic figure is nothing more than somebody appointed to create a radical change. That's who Hitler was, a Messiah, or satanic. And Hitler, his whole objective in World War II was to kill the Jews. That's really what he wanted. He was obsessed with destroying the Jews. And therefore, World War II fulfilled the prophecy of only one or two families in a city will survive. You see that? So World War II, which is unfortunate, the Holocaust, but it absorbed the terrible decree of the war of Gog against the Jews. But I want to show you something. The obsession of this man. At the end of the war, 1944, 45 or whatever, the generals came over to Hitler. This idea is brought down in the book, William Shirer, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which I once read. It's like 1,400 pages. But there were many interesting things that he said. One of them was the following, which was incredible. He said this. He said that the generals at the end of the war came to Hitler, and they said, we're losing the war. And they were losing. Really losing, and so on, So the Hitler said, what's the problem? Why are we losing? So they said, because we're not bringing troops to the front. We need railroad cars. So what happened to the railroad cars? Because you're shipping all the Jews to the concentration camps. That's why. What do you want? Instead of taking troops to the front, you're taking the Jews and you're using them to ship the Jews to the concentration camps. You see? So what we need is to cut it out. Stop sending the Jews, to prioritize the fact that you want to kill all the Jews, and maybe you want to save Germany. And remember what Hitler said, that the Third Reich would be 1,000-year Reich. That's his statement, right? You know what Hitler told the generals? He told them, get lost. It's astounding. Hitler placed the priority of killing the Jews greater than winning the war. Incredible. In fact, that shows you that Hitler is what? Is one of the greatest traitors of Germany. Because he allowed Germany to lose. It was more important for him to destroy the Jews than the Germany should win the war. That's incredible. Hitler is an incredible traitor, betrayer of Germany. Why? What was in this man? Because that's Gog. And World War II was the major thrust, emphasis of the war of Gog against the Jews. And that's the second thing, second phase. The third phase is Obama. What Obama did was incredible. And it's not just Obama, it's the UN. Let me show you what this guy did, Along comes the UN, 3 months ago, and says, we want to tell you, Yehuda, Shomron, Judah and Samaria, and Jerusalem is occupied territory. Right? This is the UN, right? Now, the gematria of Gog and Magog is 70. And there are 70 nations of the world, even though the UN is 193, but there are 70 spiritual roots. And there are only 70 nations, because many nations are really one root, like Austria and Germany is really the same, and so on. So there are 70 roots, right? 70 nations, according to Kabbalah, and in fact, even 70 nations by the time of Noach, whatever, and so on, So the gematria of Gog and Magog is 70. So Gog takes the nations of the world against the Jews, you see. So what happens? Along comes the UN. It's just astounding what they did. And they say that Israel is occupied territory, mostly actually, Yehud and Shomron, and Jerusalem. Now, okay, you want to say Yehud and Shomron is occupied, which is absolute nonsense for many reasons, which I'll say. But can you tell me how in the world you could say that Jerusalem is occupied territory? Why? Think about this. Jerusalem and the whole Eretz Israel, biblically, is in the Bible, right? That it's ours. Not only historical, it's historical, it's ours historically, the time of the Romans, you see, legally. Why? Because there is no such thing as a Palestinian nation, so how can we occupy them? There's no such thing as a legal nation called Palestine, so what do you mean you occupy them? There is no occupation of them, it doesn't exist. So what are they talking about? So not only the League of Nations gave us Israel, which was accepted by the UN. I mean, every which way you cut it. And not only that, in the New Testament, it says that Yeshu overturned the money changes in the temple. Their own Bible says that Jerusalem belongs. It talks about the temple, that the Jews had that. We're talking about, and we're talking about the whole Western civilization is Christian. So are they psychotic? How could they say that? Which is astounding. But they said it anyway. Why? Because God said, I'm in a rush. I need to fulfill the prophecy of Gog from the land of Magog now. So what I'm going to do is, they're crazy even for saying that the occupied territory is Yehud and Shomron. But I need to get them to include Jerusalem or else it won't be Gog. You see? Because Gog got to go against Jerusalem also. So I'm going to exaggerate or emphasize their psychosis, right? And make sure that they will condemn and call occupied territory Jerusalem. It's impossible. Yet they did it anyway. Why? Because that edict of the UN is Gog and Magog. That's what Obama did for us. And we have to thank the guy. You see? Because he abstained. And because he abstained, he allowed the Gog and Magog. Because they think about that. What is Gog and Magog? It's the whole world against the Jew, right? It doesn't mean the whole world's not going to war against the Jews. It's the UN that represents the whole world against the Jews. That's Gog and Magog. So what the Moshe did is astounding. He actually allowed the prophecy of Gog and Magog to happen. Wow. Do we owe Obama Hakor Satoiv? It's just absolutely incredible. I mean, I'm telling you, Mashiach is going to come and talk to me and say, Yashikoyach. Because without you, I could not have come. But that's so look at what Obama's done. Diminished Asav, Edom, America, and make it the laughing stock of the world, which of course a Muslim will do. Empower the Arabs. It's obvious he loves Arabs. He's always had a double standard. Even when they're destroying the Jews, it's still the Arabs that are the main thing. Iran, he called Iran, gave them nuclear weapons, and he's designated the end of time. It's astounding, according to that medrash. Not only that, he has enabled the UN to become Gog and Magog. So therefore it comes out that the end of Gog and Magog is not a war, because really it should have been a military war. But that was absorbed in the Holocaust. And that's why the Holocaust was so severe. It was a second part of Gog and Magog, but it was the worst part. But after that, all it is basically confrontation of the world against the Jews, you see. So he's done that. But also what Obama has done, which is very interesting, is he has enabled Trump to become president. I don't know if you realize that. Now, wait a minute. Who says that was good? Next week, you'll find out what that's all about. But right now, take it from me. He has enabled Trump. Why? Because Obama has done a terrible job with America. It's just terrible in so many different ways. Okay, that's number one. So therefore, Hillary, right? Hillary's incredible. I'll talk about Hillary next week. But but Hillary is really the continuation of Obama, you see. So what Obama's done is by allowing Hillary to take on his agenda, ultimately everybody got sick and tired of what Obama's doing, and if Hillary can continue, who needs her, right? And there's an enormous thrust against anti-establishment, and that's what they failed to recognize, that Obama has forgotten man, the common man and so on, so he lost. Obama is really the reason why Trump is there. You see? And by the way, the reason why Obama became president, because also Hillary, it was really an anti-establishment vote. They hated Bush, and they hated Hillary, so all of a sudden they picked this guy, right, with a resume, right, of community organizer, right? He became president, you see? So therefore, this is what Obama has done. And I want to tell you something. The Rebbeinu is going to destroy that man for many reasons. One, the Rebbeinu wants two things to happen. It's interesting. I'm going to dwell next week on that. What the Rebbeinu wants, Yishmael and Asav, you don't realize who they are. The original Yishmael, the son of Avraham Avinu, he did tshuva, and he was a tzaddik. You see that because the expression that the Torah uses by the death of Yishmael, vayigva. You see, and Chazal say that is only used when it's a tzaddik. He was a great man, Yishmael. He started off pretty bad, we know that, But in the end, he did tshuva because he let Yitzchak go first to bury Avram. That's how Chazal know. In fact, that's why the Tanoim that called Yishmael, how could you name a Tanoim after a Russia? Rabbi Shmuel, right? And the answer, of course, is that he's a tzaddik and so on and so forth, And we don't realize that Yishmael also was part of the Tikon. And that's why he had 12 tribes. There are 12 chieftains of Yishmael. He also was part of the Tikon. So what the Rebbeinu wants is Yishmael to come back and be part of the Tikon of Klal Yisrael. Now, all nations of the world, after the Mashiach comes, will recognize God. That's clear like that, okay? But he wants Yishmael not to be at the end to recognize God, but to be part of the Tikon process, which is an unbelievable reward that they will get. And by the way, he wants to do it to Asav. And I'll talk about next week. That's what Obama is Asav doing tshuva, being part of the Tikon process. But put that aside. So Obama had that role. Trump. Obama had that role. The role of Obama, really what he should have done, and he had why do you think the Rebbeinu gave him the House, the Congress? He had the Congress for 2 years. He could have done incredible things. What the Rebbeinu wanted is this person, and boy is he defiant. He has the koich of defiance, which is very important. You see, he wanted him to confront the Arabs and say, what are you guys doing? What are you guys, crazy? Why don't you pick the Palestinians and put it in the 22 million square kilometers? What are you taking a small state and you want to divide that? There's such an unbelievable injustice. And for what? Well, how can there be a two-state solution? It's absurd. Why? Because it's not occupied territory. It's not yours. You never had it. All you guys basically came from Syria. You can't have it. It's like, imagine, I remember Louis Farrakhan, he wanted to have the blacks have a new state in the South. Of course they laughed at the guy. You're part of America and that's the end of it. Just because you have blacks doesn't mean you can have now a state that's black. You know what I'm saying? The same thing. And Arabs are, if they want to be part of Israel, fine. But they're not, there's no state that we can say is occupied. You see. So the Rebbeinu wanted Obama to confront the Arab world, because he's a Muslim, you see? And that would have brought the Yishmael back into the fold. Because in the end, the Rebbeinu does not want to destroy. He wants the nations to be righteous and so on. You don't realize the Rebbeinu is an infinite Rahmanis, and Obama could have done it. Why? Do you know what he did? Do you know when Obama was elected? We say it's an inauguration. It wasn't an inauguration. It was a coronation. King. When he was elected in 2008, everybody worshipped the man, if you remember that far back. He had incredible power. He had the U.S. in his hands because everybody was willing to submit. Whatever you want is divine. I remember there was a newscast that said that chills ran down his back when he was inaugurated. This is not an inauguration. It's a coronation of a king. Why? Why did Moshe do that? This isn't Obama. It's the hand of God. Why? Because he wanted Obama to have that power of incredible respect. And he gave him the Congress. And this guy is nobody from nowhere. Community organizer, excuse me, that's how you become president? He had no experience. Even in the Senate, he was just there for what? A couple of months? But the Rebbe Shem chose him, you see, in order to bring back Ishmael. And therefore, I will give you such unbelievable submission of the American people, you could say anything and you're right. Not only that, you will have the Congress. What power! I mean, he was the most powerful man in the world. He could easily have he could have confronted the Arabs, which is what Clinton should have done, and that's why the Rebbe Shem is destroying both of them, Bill and Hillary. But put that aside, talk about them next week, and so on. They deserve their own time. But in any case, that's what the Rebbe Shem wanted, but he failed. Why? Because Obama's a megalomaniac. He's delusional. He thinks he's God, you see. And that's why he destroyed himself. His gaiva killed him. And that's why the Rebbe Shem will destroy him. Why? Because remember when Netanyahu went to the White House, he had him coming through the back door. You remember that? You have any idea what a bizoin that is? It's not just for Netanyahu. It's a bizoin to God's children. It's his people. How dare you treat? And Netanyahu, Israel, is an ally. It's unbelievable. This is why you treat an ally? Forget about that he's Jewish. You know? How do you treat an ally like that? And Israel is an incredible ally to Israel. America has no greater ally than Israel. Everybody knows that. And you make them go into the back door, and then you put your foot up on the table and say, I gotta eat lunch, hang around until I come back? What a bizoyan for the Jewish people. So Rebbe Shem says, wait, I'm not finished with you. Okay, how is he destroying him? 1, the end of his presidency. 2, Hillary lost, so there's no continuity in his legacy. 3, his legacy. Trump is overturning his whole legacy. You have any idea the greatest suffering of a megalomaniac is that he's going to be forgotten? That's exactly what's happening. He has no legacy, no continuity, you see. And not only that, that's not even the beginning. The contrast, because when Trump makes America great again, which he will, okay, so everybody's going to look at Obama and say, how come you couldn't do it? You see. And I hold the biggest bizoyan is yet to come, because they're building, I think for a couple of $100 million, they're building a library in Chicago. It's called the Presidential Library, right? So you know what they're going to have? They're going to have like this. They're going to have all his papers and his legislation. And next to each one, it's going to say, canceled, canceled, canceled. Could you imagine going into a museum, his papers, and next to each one it says, canceled. You got to hear this. There was a talk show host, okay? Sean Hannity. Good guy. Sean Hannity, okay. He asked Newt Gingrich, which is a very good guy. Gingrich loves Israel. You know, he said like this. I mean, you got to hear this. He said to Newt Gingrich, he says, wait a minute. If Trump is going to undo all his legacy, everything, so who's going to remember Obama? How do you know he's president? Forget about canceled, and canceled. You wouldn't even know this guy was president. So Newt Gingrich looked at him and said, you know, it's interesting, but I'll tell you how you'll know. You'll know because every president has a right to have his portrait in the White House. So as you're passing through the portraits, you're going to say, who's this guy? So they'll tell you, well, he's the 44th president. You remember him. I don't know this guy. Because there's no legislation from him. There's nothing. So the only way you'll know that he was the president is from his portrait. Other than that, he's a footnote in history. You have any idea what kind of einish that is for a megalomaniac? It's incredible what's going to happen. And I want to tell you something. God is the greatest chess player in creation. What does that mean, right? You know, here's what it means. If you take a world chess player, a grandmaster, these guys are good. Let me tell you something, right? If you play chess, you know, I'm talking about the world players, you know, the great, right? If you make a move, let's say you move a pawn, how many moves can they anticipate? If you make that pawn, how many moves can they have probability in combinations and permutations? So the answer is, I once read 15. It's astounding. You make one move and they can calculate 15 different moves that's possible from that one thing. It's incredible. I mean, these guys are really good, you know? Okay. God, forget 15 moves. The Moshe moves something 100 years earlier, because in 100 years that will be necessary in order for something to happen. That's called the Grand Master, you see. Let me show you two things that God did, which is astounding, the Yad Hashem. Here's one. Harry Reid. Harry Reid is a bizarre guy, but I'm not going to go into his personality. He was the Senate Majority Leader. Okay. Do you know what that guy did? I'll tell you what he did. He said this, until then, in order to, many votes needed the cabinet, in order to do the cabinet and so on and so forth, you needed, the opposite party can filibuster, which means they could talk on and on and on, right? A lot of hot air, obviously, but they can talk on and on, right? But you need 60 votes to stop a filibuster, right? So therefore, for for a cabinet post and many posts and so on and so forth, you need what's called bipartisan. You need both parties, or else you can't muster the 60 votes. So what did Harry Reid do in his Iluyas? Just absolute genius. He said, he passed a law that you don't need a filibuster. You can, with a simple majority of 51 votes, you can have there's no filibuster. You can stop anything with 51 votes, and therefore that's easy, because in one party, if it has 51, and therefore that even if you oppose the other party, all they need is a simple majority. That was in 2013. In 2017, when Trump now has to put his whole cabinet, the Democrats are finished. They cannot filibuster because the Republicans have 52. You see? 52. And therefore they cannot stop the Republicans from putting in anybody except the Supreme Court judge. But even that they won't touch. Why did Harry Reid do that? He didn't think that someday the Republicans will be back in power? You see? But that's the Rebbeinu Shem. He says, wait a minute. I'm not interested in you. I'm going to make you do something that's so stupid that it's going to go down in the record books, right? And that's going to give Trump absolute power. You see, that even a filibuster can't stop him because he can overcome it with a majority. That's Harry Reid. So you have to give me yashkoyach. The second one is Obama. You have to give him incredible yashkoyach. Why? Because Obama is such a megalomaniac that he refused to go to Congress to pass the laws. So what did he do? Executive orders. No problem. But he forgot. It's like in Chazal say, "Hapesha osa, hu hapesha hita." If you can what? If you can forbid it, you can also permit it. All Trump has to do is sign, and he can undo every executive order of Obama. And since most of the laws passed are executive orders, right? Then Trump can undo almost the entire legacy of this man. It's astounding. It's like God said, I need Trump to win. And I'm going to make these guys think that they're doing incredible stuff, and I will destroy them. You see, this is the chess master called God. How the Moshe makes sure that it's like unintended consequences. They themselves don't realize the consequences of their acts because they're such megalomaniacs that they think they'll be forever in power. Of course, Obama thought that, of course they can have executive order because Hillary's going to win. What's the problem? But he forgot one thing, that the only vote that counts in America is God. Everybody else is irrelevant, which I will talk about next week.